Well, welcome back to our class on the Christian's hope, the anchor of the soul. We're going to talk about the wonderful attributes and prophecies of the millennial kingdom, Christ's 1,000-year kingdom on earth. And frankly, I love teaching these sessions on the attributes of the kingdom because it is the hope. It is what anchors the soul. What I'd like to do now, let's go to our chart just to make sure we know and understand what's coming and how the 1,000-year kingdom fits in. So we see as the chart opens up, we see the 7 years of tribulation, and there's the tribulation before the Battle of Armageddon in the last 3.5 years of that tribulation. The man we know as the Antichrist will come into ascendancy. That's going to be a really, really tough time for believers. And then, of course, after 3.5 years, Christ comes back down, fights the Battle of Armageddon. We see that on the chart. The Antichrist, called the Beast, and the false prophet are thrown immediately into the flames. And you have the first resurrection. And the first resurrection is all the righteous believers of the Old Testament. That's Abraham and Sarah and Moses and Miriam and Mordecai and Esther, all the righteous believers, David, that get resurrected in the first resurrection. They're going to come to life and have everlasting life, and they're going to live in the millennial kingdom. And then Christ sends out angels, and they gather the nations, the survivors of the tribulation and Armageddon. They go through the sheep and goat judgment. The goats are thrown into the lake of fire, and the sheep go right into the millennial kingdom. And the millennial kingdom's going to last 1,000 years. And remember that then the millennial kingdom comes to pass when Satan, who is bound during that time period, is loosed, and there's a final war with Satan. Satan's thrown into the fire. Then there's the second resurrection and the white throne judgment. And that millennial kingdom, which lasts 1,000 years, which then goes into the everlasting kingdom. In the book of Revelation, these two kingdoms were made very clear, but in the Old Testament, there was only one coming kingdom of the Messiah, because of course the Messiah is going to be the Christ, the Messiah during all of the eternal future. So we can understand in a sense why in the Old Testament prophecies, the prophecies were simply of Christ's future kingdom. But as we read and analyze these prophecies, then we can see that the majority of the prophecies are about the millennial kingdom. So that's what we're going to spend a lot of time talking about. And we've already talked about things such as the millennial kingdom will have a temple. Christ will be the builder of that temple. The land area of Israel will be divided among the 12 tribes. We've already talked about things like that. So let's go on with some of the other prophecies and attributes of the millennial kingdom. First of all, and I should say that there are a whole lot of verses about this that we are not going to read. We would be here for a very long time if we started reading every verse on these things. We would seriously run out of time. So in your syllabus, there are lists of verses, but I'm going to cherry pick some of the ones that I think are very, very powerful, very meaningful about this coming future kingdom. Because again, this kingdom is to be our hope, and it's to anchor our soul. But I also wanted to point out that there's all these other verses about it that I'm not going to read, because really, you can't really read and understand the Bible, particularly the prophets, if you don't understand that there's going to be a kingdom on earth, because such a large number of verses are about the coming kingdom. So one thing we learn is that people are going to know God. And the Bible says the nations are going to know God, that Israel is going to know God, and of course the Christians are going to know God. So let's start with Israel. Jeremiah chapter 31, verse 33 and 34. This is the covenant I will make with the house of Israel after that time, declares the Lord. And of course, this covenant that he's talking about here is what we call the new covenant. The old covenant was made at Sinai, and that gets kind of misnamed the Old Testament. But it was a covenant that God made with Israel. You can see that covenant being made in Exodus chapter 24. And so now God says, okay, the old covenant's over with. I'm going to make a new covenant with the house of Israel, declares the Lord. I will put my law in their minds and write it on their hearts. I will be their God, and they will be my people. And the fact that he's going to put his law in the mind and in the heart is why there can't be an Ark of the Covenant in the new temple, because he can't take people's minds and hearts and put them in a box. And we've already covered that. That was Jeremiah chapter 3. Verse 34, no longer will a man teach his neighbor or a man his brother, saying, know the Lord, because they will all know me, from the least of them to the greatest, declares the Lord. And then he goes on to say how he's going to forgive their wickedness and their sin. Talking about the nations and the rest of the world, Habakkuk chapter 2, verse 14. I know Habakkuk's your favorite book of the Bible, but there's some great stuff in Habakkuk. Habakkuk 2:14, for the earth will be filled with the knowledge of the glory of the Lord as the waters cover the sea. Now, as the millennium develops and the natural people continue to increase, there are people that will know God but not worship him as their own Lord. It's just like the demons today. In James it says, well, the demons know God and tremble, but they don't worship him. But the fact of the matter is, everybody on earth is going to know about God. There isn't going to be any ignorance out there. 1 Corinthians 13:12, talking about the Christians. How will we be in our resurrected body? Now we see but a poor reflection as in a mirror. You might remember, if you're raised on the King James Version like I was, now we see through a glass darkly. But in 1611, a glass was a mirror. Darkly, it's a poor reflection. So the NIV translation, now, today, on this earth, how do we see life? We see but a poor reflection as in a mirror. Then we shall see face to face. Now I know in part, then I shall know fully, even as I am known. So one of the great things about the coming millennial kingdom is that we'll all know God. And of course, Jesus Christ will personally be reigning out of Jerusalem, so everybody will get a chance to see him. I don't know if everybody on earth will get a chance to meet him personally or have a meal with him, but everybody will certainly get to see him, hear him, be in a relationship with him. Another great promise of the millennial kingdom is that there'll be justice on earth. And maybe it's just because the older I get and I read the papers, I'm a little wiser. I read between the lines a little more, but there's so much injustice on earth today. Follow the money. There's bribery. There's people turning a blind eye to things that shouldn't be. There's people that don't want to deal with problems just because there's problems. There is just so much injustice on earth. And you can ignore it until you're the victim of injustice. And boy, once you're the victim of injustice, it can really leave you bitter. And we Christians have to really guard about getting bitter. And one of the things that we can relax into, one of the things that we can be thankful for, is there are very, very clear promises that when Christ is king and he's appointing the rulers, there's going to be justice on earth. I'll list a whole bunch of verses about this. Let's read a couple of these out of Isaiah chapter 11, starting in verse 1. A shoot will come up from the stump of Jesse. And of course, Jesse was David's father, and the house of David has been cut off. But the shoot, the branch, Jesus Christ, is going to come up from that line of David. From his roots a branch will bear fruit. The Spirit of the Lord will rest on him, the Spirit of wisdom and of understanding, and the Spirit of counsel and of power, the Spirit of knowledge and of the fear of the Lord. He will delight in the fear of the Lord. He will not judge by what he sees with his eyes or decide by what he hears with his ears, because people lie and they cheat. He says, but with righteousness he will judge the needy, with justice he will give decisions for the poor of the earth. So the future coming kingdom of Christ is going to be a place of justice. Isaiah chapter 1 verse 26. And of course, when Christ rules, He's going to rule along with other people. That's why he told the 12 apostles, you're going to sit on 12 thrones judging the 12 tribes of Israel. There's going to be Christ, and Christ is going to have his right-hand man and left-hand man, if you will, his close advisors. In fact, if you remember one of the things, the mother of James and John, the sons of Zebedee, came to Jesus Christ and said, Lord, grant that one of my sons will sit on your right hand when you come into my kingdom, meaning grant that one of my two sons is going to be your number 2 man in your kingdom. He'll be sitting on your right hand. And Christ said, well, that position has been prepared by my Father, meaning that God Almighty, who knows the hearts of all men for all mankind, knows who deserves to be that number 2 person in the kingdom. But the point is that there will be Christ as the king in Jerusalem, and then around the world there will be rulers. And those rulers will be people that have been faithful to him in this life. And that's why it talks in Timothy about being faithful and then reigning with Christ. Because I'll tell you, it'd be a great privilege to be one of these rulers on the face of the earth. So in Isaiah chapter 1, verse 26, it says, I will restore your judges, as in days of old, your counselors, as in the beginning. Afterward, you will be called the city of righteousness, the faithful city. Sure, because when all of the rulers are righteous, and then the people are controlled in their righteous, then the city gets to be called the city of righteousness. Jeremiah chapter 23, starting in verse 1. Talking about today's world, woe to the shepherds who are destroying and scattering the sheep of my pasture, declares the Lord. Yeah, if you think God is happy with the judges today who take bribes, who turn a blind eye, who have a personal agenda rather than justice, they're going to be in serious trouble at the resurrection. Woe to the shepherds who are destroying and scattering the sheep. Verse 2, therefore this is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says to the shepherds who tend my people. Because you've scattered my flock and driven them away and have not bestowed care on them, I will bestow punishment on you for the evil you have done, declares the Lord. I myself will gather the remnant of my flock out of all the countries where I have driven them, and will bring them back to their pasture where they will be fruitful and increase in number. Verse 4, I will place shepherds over them, and that's the faithful people. See, when you and I live, why is the hope an anchor for the soul? Remember, I covered this in an earlier session, that hope, an anchor in a boat, keeps it from being blown away in a storm, and it keeps it from drifting away. And you and I have a choice to make. You and I have a choice. Do we pray or not pray? Do we read the Bible or not read the Bible? Do we fellowship or not fellowship? Do we witness or not witness? Do we give of our material possessions and our time, or do we not? Do we exercise our ministry, or do we not? What's the value of being a good Christian versus just being a Sunday Christian, or even worse, maybe an Easter and Christmas Christian? See, there's a value, because when we're faithful, God's going to reward us for that faithfulness. And some of that reward is you get leadership positions in the kingdom, and God says, I'll place shepherds over them who will tend them, and they will no longer be afraid or terrified, nor will any be missing, declares the Lord. The days are coming, declares the Lord, when I will raise up to David a righteous branch, that's the Messiah, a king who will reign wisely and do what is just and right in the land. So one of the things you and I can look forward to in the millennial kingdom is justice on the face of the earth. And it's going to be and that's going to create a lot of joy and a lot of peace. And then, of course, along with justice, because Christ is reigning over the whole world, there's not going to be any war. And again, there's a number of verses in your syllabus about the fact there's not going to be any war. Let's read a couple of them. Let's go to Micah, the book of Micah. Now, I've already read out of Jeremiah and Isaiah, Habakkuk. Now I'm reading out of Micah. You see, the hope is the anchor of the soul. It's all over the Bible. And when we take these verses that talk about restoring judges and the fruit of the land and the people being brought back and the nations worshiping God, if you don't understand that that's talking about a literal recreated earth, that the earth is restored to be like the Garden of Eden. They don't make sense in a kind of how does this fit in the picture of heaven? And what happens is we read the Bible and there's so much of it we don't understand or that doesn't make sense, then we just kind of give up. But as soon as you realize that what's going to happen in the restored earth and the millennial kingdom, and you start reading these verses about I'm going to restore their judges, and it all makes perfect sense, absolutely. And the same thing when he's talking about war. There wouldn't be any war in heaven. But if you have nations on the face of the earth, different nations, there's always been war. Since the fall of Adam and Eve, there's been war. And now Christ is going to reign as king, and guess what? No war. And that means, none of the young men or young women dying in the war. Nobody being displaced. Nobody being deported. All the horrors of war. Just completely disappearing from the planet. And again, I'm a citizen of the United States. I haven't seen a lot of the horrors of war. I've seen some of them because I have a son who was wounded in battle in Afghanistan. I've seen some of the horrors of war, but I haven't seen horrors of war like people that have lived in many parts of Europe. Boy, but I tell you, to have no war, what a great promise. Let's go to Micah chapter 4, verses 2. Many nations will come and say, "Come, let us go up to the mountain of the Lord, to the house of the God of Jacob. He will teach us his ways, so we may walk in his paths. The law will go out from Zion, the word of the Lord from Jerusalem." Why? Because Jesus Christ is king, and that's where he's going to be, and he's going to make decisions for the earth. So the law, as things shift, the law is going to keep going out from Jerusalem as Christ rules over the earth. Verse 3, he will judge between many peoples and will settle disputes for strong nations far and wide. They will beat their swords into plowshares, plow blades, and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation will not take up sword against nation, nor will they train for war anymore. And then it goes on in verse 4, every man will sit under his own vine and his own fig tree. Now, you might not like gardening, but the point is that vines and fig trees were two things that took a long time to grow to really produce a lot of fruit. And so when it says that you sit under your own vine and your own fig tree, it's a picture of the fact that there's going to be a continual peace. Absolutely. No one will make them afraid, for the Lord Almighty has spoken. So that's Micah chapter 4. Zechariah chapter 9, starting in verse 9. Now, this is interesting because Zechariah 9 blends both comings of Christ, his first coming and his second coming. And this kind of thing was confusing to people because they didn't know, they didn't understand that verses like this took the first coming of Christ and put it right next to the second coming of Christ. And it looks, if you read it, like it's all just one coming of Christ. So when Christ came riding in on a donkey, they said, oh, he's the Messiah. But then when he didn't conquer the earth and set up his kingdom, they said, oh, he's not. You and I need to know that what God did is between the first coming of Christ and the second coming of Christ, God put in the age of grace, the Christian era, the 2,000 years so far that started on the day of Pentecost and will end with the rapture. But the Old Testament prophecies had Christ coming, both comings were put together. So here in Zechariah it says, rejoice greatly, O daughter of Zion. Shout, daughter of Jerusalem. See, your king comes to you, righteous and having salvation, gentle and riding on a donkey, on a colt, the foal of a donkey. Verse 10, and then it would be him speaking, I will take away the chariots from Ephraim and the war horses from Jerusalem, and the battle bow will be broken. He will proclaim peace to the nations. His rule will extend from sea to sea, from the river to the ends of the earth. That may have been God speaking instead of the Messiah speaking. But you see what Christ is going to do? He's going to come into Jerusalem. He's going to take away the battle bow. He's going to take away the chariots. And he's going to proclaim peace, not just to Jerusalem, but to the world, to the nations. His rule will extend from sea to sea, from the river, which the river in biblical parlance was the Euphrates, to the ends of the earth. Another great, fantastic promise, so no war. Another absolutely fabulous promise is health. You know, I don't know about you, but boy, just maybe being in ministry, I do a lot of prayer requests and do a lot of ministering of healing and talking to people and counseling to people that's sick. And sickness is just such a scourge. And of course, many times it ends in death, which is a horrible scourge. And a promise that everyone would be healthy is such a powerful promise. And my favorite, and I know there's some that are really profound, but my all-time favorite, Isaiah 33, verse 24, and I'm reading out of Isaiah chapter 33, verse 24, and no inhabitant will say, I am sick. The people who dwell there will be forgiven their iniquity. And no inhabitant will say, I am sick. You know, I remember as a parent, you know, when our kids were little, you know, and oh my gosh, my wife was just so sensitive to those kids, and you know, it'd be like 3 in the morning, 2 in the morning, whatever, and you'd hear those little feet come down the hallway in the middle of the night, and you just knew something was wrong, and boy, you're just awake, you know, and you're just alert, and here comes little Sierra, and she'd just say, Mommy, I'm sick, and it just tears your heart out. What a great promise that no one will say, I am sick. Gosh, what a powerful promise that is. And everybody will be healed. Isaiah 32, verse 3, then the eyes of those who see will no longer be closed. In other words, if you can see, you'll actually see. The ears of those who hear will listen. Verse 4, the mind of the rash will know and understand, and the stammering tongue will be fluent and clear. Even mental disease will be healed. The mind of the rash will know and understand. Then Malachi 4:2, fabulous prophecy of healing, not well understood. It says, but for you who know my name, for you who revere my name, the Son of Righteousness, S-U-N, the S-U-N, the Son of Righteousness will rise with healing in its wings, and you will go out and leap like calves released from the stall. You know, and that verse used to confuse me no end. First of all, I'd say, why does it say S-U-N instead of S-O-N? And you see, one of the titles of the Messiah was the sunrise from on high. And we see that in Luke? Luke chapter 1, verse 78. So it says the Son of Righteousness, that was a title of the Messiah. So for the people who revere his name, because they're going to be in the first resurrection, here comes the Messiah with healing in his wings. And the wings was not, you know, obviously the Messiah doesn't have wings. It referred to the tzitzit in the wings of the garment. So here's this prophecy in Malachi that the Messiah would have healing in the tassels on his garment, in the border of his garment. And then the woman, you know, that woman in the Gospels who somehow or other, and we don't know how, recognized that this man was the Messiah. And she'd been bleeding for 12 years. And she says, if I can just touch the border of his garment, I'll be whole. Where'd she get that idea? You know, gee, if I just touch his clothes, I'll be healed. Where did that idea come from? From Malachi. That was the promise. That when the Messiah would come, he'd have healing in those tzitzit and in the border of his garment. And so she picked right up on that. And when she touched the border of her garment, then God did that miracle and absolutely healed her bleeding. She'd been bleeding for 12 years. And so here's this great prophecy in Malachi. The Son of Righteousness will rise with healing in his wings. And then when you're healed, you go out and leap like calves released from a stall. And if you've ever been around young animals and how they, you know, caper about and leap and dance around, it's just so much fun. That's how it's going to be when we're healed. You know, we've got these bodies and they've got these problems, and when we're totally healed, man, we're going to have so much energy and we're going to go bouncing around all over the place. Revelation chapter 21, verse 4, he will wipe every tear from their eyes. There will be no more death or mourning or crying or pain. Gosh, no more death or mourning or crying or pain, for the old order of things has passed away. Just fantastic stuff. And safety. Again, the world is such an unsafe place. Our two little grandkids, and boy, even when they're out in the yard, you're constantly looking out the window. Are they safe? Are they safe? When I was a little kid, my brother and I, my friends, we'd get on our bicycle, we'd ride for miles. Nobody thought a thing about it. Now there's the level of unsafety in the world has just gone through the roof. You can go to the mall and there's some suicide bomber and you end up dead, or you're just sitting on your porch and some drive-by shooter goes by, or you're walking down the road and you're attacked by the neighbor's Rottweiler or something. Not that I'm against Rottweilers, but I've just known it to happen. It happened in my neighborhood when I lived in Charlotte, North Carolina. So, this world simply isn't safe. And what a great promise that when we're raised in the Millennial Kingdom, we're going to be living on earth. It's going to be a great place to live, and it's going to be safe. In Isaiah chapter 32, verse 18, and again, there's loads of verses on this on the syllabus. I'm only going to cherry pick a couple. Isaiah 32:18, my people will live in peaceful dwelling places, in secure homes, in undisturbed places of rest. Secure homes, that's nice. My door's locked. Ezekiel 34, verse 24 to 28. I, the Lord, will be their God, and my servant David will be the prince among them. I, the Lord, have spoken. Now, it's not going to be the resurrected David who's going to be the prince. It's going to be the Messiah. But he's called David here. For you technical people, that's the figure of speech antonomasia. He's called David here because he's the continuation and fulfillment of the Davidic dynasty. So he says, my servant David will be prince among them. I, the Lord, have spoken, and I will make a covenant of peace with them and rid the land of wild beasts so that they may live in the desert and sleep in the forests in safety. I will bless them and the places surrounding my hill. I will send down showers in season. There will be showers of blessing. I don't know if you've ever heard that phrase before. Oh, showers of blessing. Yeah, it comes from the Bible. Here it is in Ezekiel chapter 34, verse 26. The trees of the field will yield their fruit, and the ground will yield its crops. The people will be secure in their land. What a blessing that people will be secure. There won't be kidnappings. There won't be roving bandits. There won't be drive-by shootings. People will be secure. There won't be thieves breaking in when you go to work. They will know that I am the Lord when I break the bars of their yoke and rescue them from the hands of those that enslave them. They will no longer be plundered by the nations, nor will wild animals devour them. They will live in safety, and no one will make them afraid. What a great promise. And it's not just people who are unsafe. One of the things my wife and I enjoy doing is watching some of the animal shows, like on National Geographic Channel and some of that. And with all the modern photography and things that they can do, they've got some pretty graphic footage of how the animals have to kill each other to eat. And the animals aren't safe. And not only are they not safe from each other, they're not safe from starvation. There comes the droughts, and then they die of the heat and of the drought and of lack of water, or the monsoons come and they drown. I mean, even the animals aren't safe on this planet. And what a great promise that sure, there are verses that promise that life is going to be safe for us. Wouldn't it be nice if there was a promise that life was going to be safe for the animals? And actually, there is. So in Joel chapter 2, verse 21, be not afraid, O land. Be glad and rejoice. Surely the Lord has done great things. Be not afraid, O wild animals, for open pastures are becoming green. Because remember, in the restoration of all things, in the new heavens and earth, the millennial kingdom, all the animals are going to be eating plants. Of course, if there's desert, it's not going to help. But what's he say? We've already read prophecies, the deserts are going to bloom. So the open pastures are becoming green. The trees are bearing their fruit. The fig tree and the vine yield their riches. So he says, be not afraid, O wild animals. because you're going to get to be saved too. The millennial kingdom is just going to be a great place to live. I don't know, once you know stuff about this, I can't imagine anybody not getting saved, not wanting to be there. If I just knew what it was about and just said, that's where I want to be. I mean, if you're an outdoorsman, if you're a hiker, a tenter, a camper, can you imagine? I mean, gosh, what a great place to be. It's no wonder people ought to know this stuff so they'll get saved. Wow. Of course, then I just mentioned the land getting healed and the deserts blooming. We've already read some verses on this. Let's read a couple more. Isaiah chapter 35, verse 7. The burning sand will become a pool, the thirsty ground, bubbling springs. In the haunts where jackals once lay, grass and reeds and papyrus will grow. And all that needs water, and that water will be provided. And Isaiah 41, verses 18 to 20. I will make rivers flow on barren heights and streams within the valleys. I will turn the desert into pools of water and the parched ground into springs. I will put in the desert the cedar and the acacia, and they need a lot of water. The myrtle, well, at least the cedar does. The myrtle and the olive. I will set pines in the wasteland, the fir and the cypress together, so that the people may see and know, may consider and understand that the hand of the Lord has done this, that the Holy One of Israel has created it. See, this is really showing that God really does love us. God really, really does love us. He really does care for his people, and he really does want us to live in a wonderful place, on a wonderful earth, with wonderful people and a wonderful ruler. And that's coming in the millennial kingdom. And he wants to know that it's from him, because when he gave Adam and Eve dominion of the earth, which you can read about in Genesis 1 and Genesis 2, it was their decision to sin against God and to fall. That wasn't God's fault. The reason that the earth is fallen now isn't God's fault. That was never his purpose. That was never his intention. And so now we live in this kind of horrid fallen earth, which is man's fault and the devil's doing. But God's going to take it back. And when he takes it back and the whole earth is paradise again, then we're going to know that the Lord has done it. Let's continue these attributes and prophecies in the next session. God bless you.